Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah? Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to see you here sitting for my presentation. My name is Gijs van Campenhout again. Just to have a bit of, I'm a PhD student at Erasmus University. My PhD is part of a bigger project at the university, and the project is called Sport and the Nation. With me there's another PhD student who's not here, but he's doing a similar research on the Olympics and the IOC. But today I'm going to tell you about, well, a critical reflection on foreign-born players and migrants in national teams. Because what's going on? Here we got the France squad around 2014, 2013, and faded are the people who are either first or second generation migrants. If we have a look at this, in general you see that if we cut out the migrants, well, France barely have a squad to play with. However, if we have a closer look, then we see that Rob Fanny should also be faded out because he's a second generation migrant because his parents are born in Benin. But more interesting are these three players. Patrice Evra, he's born in Senegal, so he's the first migrant, so he's obvious, clear that he's faded out. Steve Mandanda, born himself in Congo, Zaire, Kinshasa, should be faded out, but he's still left in. And then we got Rio Mafuba, which is kind of an interesting player because he's born at sea. He was running away, I think he was fleeing and ended up in France, but he's born at sea. In general, these three players can be named foreign born because they're not born in France but in another country but represent France at the World Cup. However, if we have really look at the definition of migrants, you could also say that third generation migrants like Sami Nasri, whose parents are born in France but his grandparents are Algerian, could also be faded out. I had a look at these statistics and these numbers and I thought, well, it seems that they are increasing. But is this a recent phenomenon? I'm an historian, so I found that is this just new or has this got a long history? And can I trace this back? The numbers and the typologies of people representing other nations. I do this, I want to emphasize that I kind of use international football as a prism to society. I basically want to see how citizenship and migration aspects work in international football, because in international football, in my opinion, these kinds of issues really come up to the center, are enlarged, are really visible to every one of us. But I started my research and I kind of found out that there is a lack of an historical overview of migrant players or foreign-born players. Even the FIFA doesn't have a sort of a database or sort of an overview about which player represented which national team, where he was born and if he changed his nationality. Only slightly from the 1960s onwards, they kind of keep on track, but not in a general sense, but just so now and then. So what I thought to myself, well, I'm gonna fill this lacune. And so I created my own database on the FIFA World Cup, tracing it back from the 1930s, from the first World Cup, going all the way to the last one in 2014. I included all national teams and their selections in the database, predominantly based on biographical data of the players, which means I captured their date of birth, the place of birth, but also traced their genealogy back, as far as I could, of course. Where their parents born, where their grandparents born, where have they played, also for example, to see what kind of connection with different countries they have. I ended up with a database that includes 9,400 cases. I have to say they're not all unique because some players have represented a nation at multiple World Cups, so they're included in different sections of the World Cup, but still it's quite a lot. However, when I was building this database, I ran into some issues. And the main issue which I wanted to illustrate in terms of the France squad is who counts as a migrant? Who counts as being foreign born? What definitions are used and how will you record them in a database? Because in a database they're either national or they're migrant. There's nothing in between, it's black or white. So I thought to myself, what I'm going to do is I'm start using citizenship, because I also want to know about how citizenship is given and is acquired. So I started out measuring it based on citizenship criteria. Well, to many of us it might seem natural. Either if you're where you're born or where your parents were born, you get nationality. It seems kind of natural, it's just given to us. However, it isn't. It's really highly politicized requirement, high tool to give and to get. So you basically got these two. They use solely, which is if you're born in a country within territory, you get citizenship or you're eligible to get citizenship of the country. And you got the jus sanguinis, which is if your parents are born or your grandparents, then you might be eligible to get citizenship. In recent times, with globalization, porous borders, people moving from country to country, and there have been some scholars who are debating about, is this fair? Is being born somewhere, having some parents, is it not just a kind of a lottery? You're just lucky to be born in a certain country, in a certain from certain parents. So they kind of came up with what's now called a jus nexi, or a stakeholders principle to acquire citizenship, which basically means that if you reside in a country long enough and you contribute to the economy and to the social state of the society, then you're eligible to get the citizenship. That can mean it can be like staying 5 years in the country, can be 3. There are all different regulations, naturalization regulations within the different countries. This jus nexi is kind of seems to be making the world a bit more fair, so to say, more equal. I mean, you can work for your citizenship in a certain way. However, on the other hand, it also becomes manipulative, especially by states. And what we see in society at large, but also in football, that states are increasingly using this jus nexi citizenship to attract the best and the brightest, because they can offer them something which is really valuable. They can offer them citizenship. With this background in mind, and also I have to point out, these are also kind of a bit of the rules of FIFA. They kind of follow up with the rules of citizenship. I started to build this database. And I started out with what's called the foreign born proxy in international migration studies, which is kind of in line with the jus soli, where you're born statistics. And that's, if someone's born in another country, then he's called foreign born. When I was dealing with it, I ran into some issues with several players. And predominantly because in international migration, what they do is that they take these current territorial borders, the current geopolitical situations, and they just place it radically over the past. So the borders of today will be measured on the borders of 1930. And I would say, from a historical perspective, it kind of overlooks things. Because we all know that borders have changed, countries have come into existence, bigger states have failed, and also in a geopolitical context, there have been colonial relationships between countries which give certain people easier access to citizenship than others. So what I came up with is like 3 approaches, so to say, to the same database, to the same football players. And these are basically, the first one is the current state borders, which is the jus soli thing. I just traced the nowadays borders in political context back to 1930 to see how many would be labeled foreign born. In a second attempt, I took into account these territorial borders at the time of the FIFA World Cup, because to me that's a bit more fair, a bit more justice, a bit more accurate in that sense. And in the third approach, I kind of took the colonial ties between countries into account. I'm going to show you in a minute some of my results so far, because it's still work in progress. But I have some disclaimers to make before you're going to see this. And the first one is you have to keep in mind that I've only tracked these, I've only kept this database for the World Cups. So it's only 1 in every 4 years that I can show data on. In relation to that, some teams will not qualify for every single World Cup, with the Netherlands as the best example, I would say. But so there's a lack of continuity in this data. Only Brazil is the only country who plays for all World Cups. Although I have to say they're pretty boring because they have used non-foreign-born players whatsoever. But that's not an issue. Italy was a really good candidate, but well, we all know what happens. The third one I want to point out is that, I want to emphasize basically, is that you will see a lot of different percentages and numbers between the different World Cups, but also within the World Cups I could have shown differences between countries. And that is partly reflected how the countries deal with giving citizenship to other, to members from outside the state. Some are really simple to get, like the United States passport. It's quite easy to get, while countries like Japan and Korea, it's hard to get naturalized. And it also reflects into this database. And the last one, as place of birth is really important in my story. I've calculated that I kind of missed in total on the total cases of 9,400, I missed around 5.5% of the place of birth are missing. And if I missed them, I kind of assumed that the team they represented, that's where they were born. And that was predominantly in the past. Okay, those are kind of disclaimers you have to take into account. If we're going to use this foreign-born proxy, you see that, well, basically it has always been quite high, the number of foreign-born players. You see that already in 1938, it's around 12%. And right now we're even below that. But as I mentioned, to me it was kind of a straightforward, because I used the borders to take them back to back to 1930. So what you see in 2014, and I'll give you an example of it. Again, France, although the other way around. Well, France used 3 foreign-born players, as I mentioned. France could easily field another team at this last World Cup. There were 25 players. They were France-born, born in France, but represented another nation, another state at the World Cup. Interestingly enough, 16 out of the 23 selected players of Algeria were France-born. But of course, due to mainly their parents, sometimes grandparents, they still allowed to represent Algeria, and they did. In total for the 2014 World Cup, I could have labeled 84 players that were foreign-born. So just as an example, France. Then I was taking the territorial changes into account. So for example, if you were born before 1990 in the Soviet Union, in, for example, Ukraine, what is now Ukraine, by that time you did not have a choice. There was no Ukraine, there was non-existent. So you could only represent the Soviet Union. However, if you represented still, you were the same person, and you represented in 1994, not the Soviet Union but Russia, what was the follow-up, then you instantly change from being a national to a foreign-born. But it's also the other way around. So many of these people who are in the first instance labeled being foreign-born, because I took the territorial changes into account, became nationals. So the numbers significantly dropped, as you can see, especially in this period of time. But we still see a rising line from, let's say, 98 onwards. As an example, one of the interesting cases of disintegrated states is, in my opinion, Yugoslavia. Great players like Zavimir Boban, Davor Suker, Mihajlovic, Mijatovic, they all grew up playing together as Yugoslavians. They even got world champion of youth in 1987, and they were tipped as being the next big thing in international football, and even the 1990 World Cup winners or the 1994 World Cup winners. We never know what would happen, because in 1990, well, the country war broke out, the players were teared apart, and the players had to decide which team they would represent and which citizenship they would take on. Where, for example, Mihajlovic and Mijatovic choose to represent Serbia, Prosinecki, Suker and Boban chose the Croatian citizenship. Predominantly, their decision was based on ethnicity, and not part of where they were born, but predominantly on ethnicity, to which ethnic groups you relate most. And we have seen in 1998 that Croatia was quite successful at the World Cup, finishing third, again beating the Netherlands, of course, but the Croatia is doing pretty well in football. Then my last approach, I kind of took the colonial relationship into account. With the reason, excuse me, that the footballers who were born in a colonial environment by the time, they got automatically citizenship of the country, of the colonizing country. So they could not have chosen any other citizenship, they just were. And you see that the numbers again kind of get lowered. Not much, but a bit. And I have two examples to show you. First of all, this is Dutch international Bep Bakhuis. In 1934 he represented the Netherlands. However, he was born in the Dutch East Indies. However, by that time when he was born, it was a Dutch colony, so he got Dutch citizenship instantly, without question. And in the Netherlands, he's also considered to be a really good player, just a Dutch player. His Dutch roots got even more emphasized because of his parents. They were both Dutch, had Dutch citizenship, and it just tended to work at the time in Dutch East India. Another example is the squad of the Portuguese team in 1966, which had 4 black players in it. 4 black players originating from Portuguese Mozambique, with of course the most famous Eusebio in it. Kind of a similar story. They were born overseas, but it was part of the kingdom of Portugal by that time, so they got Portuguese citizenship. Also, they were kind of accepted as being Portuguese, especially Eusebio, of course, but not as easy as, I would say, not as easy as Bep Bakhuis, because there were physical differences in their appearances. But still, on paper, they are and were Portuguese. So they had no other, they have not had the opportunity to represent Mozambique. Okay, if I take all these approaches together, first thing to notice is that it really does matter how you define migrants or foreign born. You see the dots, I hope it's a bit clear, but they're all over the place, and the blue ones are definitely higher than the other ones. So that's the thing, you really need to define who counts as a migrant and who not, who can be included in the squad and who doesn't. What's interesting to see is that from the 1980s onwards, you see an increase in all approaches. But to me, especially in the beginning, it's not really that shocking as the media kind of represent it. You would always say it has been going on already since the 1930s. So what's kind of new about this? But you do see that in recent times, it does get steeper and steeper. And I'm just wondering right now, isn't it just a reflection of international migration patterns, globalization, increased mobility of players? Also, I have to say that I started out from this database out from 2014 and worked backwards, so that all the dots merged together at one place seems kind of logic. And the last thing I want to remark about this last point is that it is in these times that states are more and more attracting talented players. They kind of use the Nexi model to attract the best and the brightest. Also, the selection is based on if people are being trained and being educated in a certain country, they get their citizenship. So that might give us an indication that more and more foreign players are becoming visible. The last thing I want to say, now I round up, is this line, this X dot. I would like to compare it with the international migrants in general, but it's kind of hard. As you see, there's a big difference, a big gap, especially in the later years, because this international migration trend here, that's like all migrants, everybody who migrates, even the one who does not need to have citizenship of another country, which is a mandatory thing for being in football. But if you would take this line, and I'm really searching for data on it, on such called elite migrants, like the football players, it might be that it's more or less the same line as we see in football. So that was my story. Thank you for listening. If you're interested in these kind of issues on FIFA or the Olympics, please look at our website or follow us at Sport Nation at Twitter, because we're kind of blogging all over the place. So, thanks a lot.